This hint is going to be on the recessionary gap using the aggregate supply, aggregate demand analytical framework. And I'll be explaining the graph, and I'm going to go ahead and just do it freehand so that you can see it develop as it goes. So it won't be perfectly straight or anything, but I think it'll be helpful to you. So we're going to have our axes here, and remember we have the big P up here, which is no longer a product price. Now it is the actual aggregate price level. You can think of it even as sort of as a price index in the economy. And then on the x-axis we're going to have Y, and that stands for income, which is equivalent to output. Okay, so you can think of it either way, income or output, because they are equivalent. And this one we're going to label the aggregate price level. Okay? And our basic framework is going to be our downward sloping AD, which stands for aggregate demand, and our upward sloping short-run aggregate supply. So SAS is short-run aggregate supply. Now, the book that we're using draws separate long-run and short-run aggregate supply curves. So just to introduce this whole model, let's go ahead and also draw a long-run aggregate supply. Okay? So if the economy is right here at this intersection, we're in both long-run equilibrium and short-run equilibrium, because short-run aggregate supply equals aggregate demand, right? And long-run aggregate supply equals aggregate demand. This is all happening right here at the intersection. So what we're going to do next is show an economy that is not in equilibrium. Okay, so this looks very complicated, but we'll walk through it one step at a time. First, look at all the white curves. We have our long-run aggregate supply curve, which is set where we are at potential income, or YP. We have our initial aggregate demand curve, AD1 here. We have our initial short-run aggregate supply curve, number 1, SAS1. And we can see that our intersection, our initial equilibrium, which is labeled, the results are labeled PEYE, is right here, okay, right there. We'll mark that with a nice big dot, okay? So that's our short-run equilibrium. So what we see here is that our short-run equilibrium is not a long-run equilibrium, because there is no intersection with the long-run aggregate supply curve. And furthermore, we normally call this particular one, where we can see that the equilibrium income is less than potential income, we call that a recessionary gap. I'm just going to label this RG for recessionary gap. Okay? So how do we get out of a recessionary gap? What this graph indicates are two perspectives on this. First, we're going to take the classical perspective. In the classical perspective, what we do in this situation is we wait for prices and wages to move downward. The recession will cause prices to go down, wages to go down, and we will see this short-run average supply curve, number 1, shift down and to the right until it becomes SAS2. And when we do that, we will then arrive, and I'll put this one in red, at this intersection right here, okay, where we are now at YP, okay, but we have a new price level. This equilibrium price level is going to be PC for the classical price level. Okay, so that is one alternative perspective. Let's take a different alternative perspective, and this is going to be the Keynesian perspective. So what we're going to do now is focus, we were at this, again, this equilibrium PEYE with the white curves, and we're in a recessionary gap. We want to get out of that. And instead of waiting, what we're going to do is either use fiscal or monetary policy. So we either are going to use some policy regarding government spending, taxes, or the money supply, Federal Reserve policy, to move our aggregate demand curve. In this case, because it's a recessionary gap, we want to move that curve to the right. And so we're going to end up at this blue aggregate demand curve number 2. Okay? And we'll mark this new intersection here with the blue dot, right? And this is where that would take us. And notice that we are once again at YP, just as we were with the classical equilibrium, the red one here, but our price level is different. It's higher. Our equilibrium price level now is PK, K for Keynesian. Okay? So these are two different perspectives about how to get out of this recessionary gap. Now, which one is correct is the subject of very much a debate and controversy, but here we just want you to see that this framework can be used to illustrate either perspective. One comment that we can make here is that the idea of waiting, the classical idea of waiting for this short-run average supply curve to shift down and to the right, that may take a very long time. For example, look at the Great Depression or look at Japan during the first decade of the 2000s. Whereas this aggregate demand shifting policy can be done in a shorter time frame. So one possible way of looking at this is that both perspectives can be useful, but it depends on which framework we're looking toward, the shorter run or the longer run.